Hello, I think we are now live and into the main room. My name is Lindsey MacDonald. I am Managing Director of Street League and also Vice Chair of DataKind UK. And I have been asked to, I suppose, facilitate a little bit of an end of day reflection conversation. I'm delighted to be joined by Hannah Goulding, who is the Civil Society Officer at the GLA, and also Christina Finlay, who is Director Data and Analytics at Nest. Before I go to them, I have some very exciting winners to announce from the day. Coming from a sport charity, we are always keen on a competition or two, so I was glad that I got this opportunity to read out the top 3 prizes. So these are individuals who have been most active in the chat, the expo, the networking functions over the day, and the winners are Stacey Pottinger, Toby Johnson, and Roz Thompson. And I think Giselle and the team at DataKind will be in touch with individuals to make sure that you get some lovely swag and gifts for your efforts. So that's fantastic. And hopefully actually the greater reward and win from all of that activity was lots of connections and learning and opportunity to discuss things. So we will absolutely welcome and ask for people to send through their reflections and also your questions coming up through the chat or the Q&A function, which I know you've all been using all day. So please don't let it be a conversation just for the 3 of us. We want everybody to be involved. But while you warm up and type your questions, I am going to go first to Christina and then to Hannah and just ask, what your reflections are on the festival and kind of your thoughts at this stage as we close out day 2 of the Data for Good Fest.
Great, thanks, Lindsey. Really lovely to meet you and Hannah as well. My name is Christina Finlay. I'm the Director of Data and Analytics at Nest Corporation, which is a UK government pensions organisation that was set up to ensure that everyone in the UK, all UK workers, have access to a pension. Prior to that, I was at National Trust. So I've got a pretty good grounding in terms of what people might use or how charities could find data quite useful. The festival obviously has been as we all knew, would be stimulating, lots of good thoughts. I think there's, for me, I guess the thing that I'm taking out, I'm speaking tomorrow, and the thing that I'm really taking out of today is the idea of how do you start how do you start and how do you think of your vision? How do you think of your aim? How do you get buy-in for that? More than anything, that's the thing that we all find really, really challenging. So I'm definitely thinking about how I can help everyone address that kind of question tomorrow. And the other thing that I'm thinking about is how can we make this really useful, and how can we all connect and not just make this a once a year, once in a while 3-day event, but how can we make sure that we're connecting on a more continual basis? And definitely those are the things that are on my mind.
Great, thanks, Lindsey and Christina. It's really nice to be here. As Lindsey said, I'm Hannah Goulding and I work at the Greater London Authority as Civil Society Officer. I've done a lot of work. My remit of work up until very recently was the Civil Society Data Officer. So looking at how the Greater London Authority as the regional government in London should be supporting and working with civil society to develop their data maturity, data capacity, working with a number of lovely people who you've probably heard speak over the last 2 days from places like DataKind, from Superhighways, and really working as well to embed kind of learnings from data which comes out of civil society. So kind of recognizing the insights, the stories, etc., that come out of civil society in policy making and trying to change the way that we work at City Hall to ensure that like community voice is reflected in policy. So it's been really, really great to come along to the festival the last couple of days. I think some of my key kind of takeaways so far, which have been really kind of heartening, I think, is that there's a real recognition that for any kind of data or digital program, be that a partnership program, be that internally within organizations, is that you really need to start from a place of trust, building relationships and having that buy-in. And I've heard that across sort of from funders who've presented, from researchers who presented, from Giselle earlier talking about the data collective. like really important to like develop those relationships and trust and get that kind of collaborative working and buy-in. And the second thing, which I think has been really interesting and something that we're doing more of in our work, but is this idea of kind of recognizing that importance of storytelling and data being much broader than perhaps the scary numbers and quantitative spreadsheets that I think definitely in my experience, people who don't have traditional data skills tend to not see it as data, but actually from some of the conversations that I've been in today, the giving schemes, yesterday's decolonizing data, etc., like the value given to storytelling, insights, data collected in different ways has really come through strongly in some of the conversations that I've heard. So that's been really, really great to see. But yeah, excited to see your questions.
Brilliant, thank you. So just a prompt again, one final nudge of any questions or reflections that you have to put those into the Q&A. And also in the event tab, there is a poll for the end of the day as well. So if you'd like to add in your answers to that. Have you met any new people over the course of the festival? And how would you rate today's Data for Good Fest? So obviously in true data conference event style, we are ensuring we capture some quantitative data at the moment, I suppose, to some extent. But I completely agree, Hannah, just on that point that you made about creating that trust and buy-in, and doing so with so many different, I suppose, different stakeholders and people coming from different points along the journeys. And I think that was my reflection over the last 2 days, is hearing and seeing how many people are talking about being on a data journey. And actually that feels really positive, because I remember attending data sessions, conferences, discussions with the third sector maybe 5 years ago, and it was about trying to convince people that data ought to be thought about or looked at. So it feels like we're on the journey, and I think it's interesting and quite exciting actually that there are so many different paths being taken and different routes being taken. I was sharing earlier at Street League, we've very much had a social impact data journey, and then all of a sudden COVID emerged in the last 12 months, and we recognized the opportunity to take that approach and those methods and apply it across all of our organization, all of our data, be it finance, HR, and trying to use that to integrate insight more effectively and not have these silos. So I think it feels like the conversation's moving on. I don't know if both of you almost reflecting on where we are and the conversations that we're having in the Data Fest at the moment, what do you think have been the big, I suppose, developments or steps forward that we've maybe seen in the sector in the last, few years? Do you feel like I guess a different way to frame the question, do you feel like you're having the same conversations you were having several years ago, or are you having new conversations, which would suggest maybe some progress? Christina, can I come to you first?
Yeah, and but because I'll build on what Hannah said, is that I think we are having different conversations, and that is that there does feel differently than there was 5 years ago. There does feel like there's a recognition that actually data can be really good for us all. Data can really help us to be more efficient, can help us to drive value, can help us to understand our customers. So to me, it feels like there's absolutely that understanding. That we are all on this journey, or whatever stage we're at in the journey, that we're all starting. I think that feels really great to me. That feels like we're having success and we're pushing it along. I think there's so many people though still who are in two ways, both that you said, Hannah, wondering how, and they don't know how. They just know they need to be on the journey, but they really don't know how they're going to do it, and that's they're a little scared. It's a little intimidating. And then the other that Hannah, you talked about, that I really agree with, is the idea that data literacy is the thing. The end point is no longer the same. That I think that 5 years ago, we were talking about the end point of just surfacing some reporting. And now it feels like what we're talking about is further along, which is surfacing some actionable insight, surfacing some visualizations, surfacing something that's really intuitive so that people can just understand it without having an analytics degree or anything like that. And so that both those things that to me say, yeah, we've definitely changed the conversation.
Yeah, I think I'd just echo what Christina was saying in terms of kind of the types of people also like engaging with data and using it and surfacing that data at a kind of a later point, I suppose, like turning the dial. So we're actually further along. I can't remember the name of the person who did the presentation yesterday from the London Air Ambulance, but also talking about not needing it to be the optimum. It doesn't need to be shiny and glossy, and we don't need to be like, you know, the data experts to actually start this journey and do something, produce something. And theirs was like a digital tool that's kind of improving their way of working. But I think that it's like the confidence to start the conversation, even if you're not a kind of data expert or a digital expert, but actually the confidence is there. I think also events like this, spaces like this, like networks seem to be kind of popping up. So actually the sort of scaffolding, the support needed to actually start these conversations seems to be kind of quite vibrant, and lots of support to sort of start on that conversation. And just on another point, like I think also COVID has perhaps accelerated like these conversations and the point that we're at, just from our own experience at the Greater London Authority. Last year we started a London Community Response Survey, which was a weekly survey going out to our civil society stakeholders to get like a temperature check on how the pandemic was impacting them. And something we were really pleased to see when we did a kind of check-in was that actually civil society organisations were using the insight that we were kind of gathering from that each week. Initially, it was set up to inform kind of strategic bodies making kind of pan-London decisions, but actually the outcome that civil society organisations were using it to reflect on their own work, to change the direction of their delivery week on week, and compare themselves and see where they were at in terms of kind of impact was really positive, and actually showed that this was a useful thing, and I suppose not like an extractive thing where we were just getting insights to inform strategic policy work, but actually informing kind of the delivery and I suppose the important stuff which civil society organisations are doing.
I think, Hannah, what I love to hear about that is the sharing of data, and that feels like something that's also changed in the last few years, and it's probably genuinely because we're now able to, that we're actually, our data, you know, and I'm not going to say there's an absolute confidence that your data doesn't have to be perfect. It's okay if your data is not perfect. You can still make decisions on it. You can still do things with it. You can still share it, because actually that's one of the ways that we will start a conversation. But I love to hear that you started a survey and that you're just throwing it out there to say we want to help.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the openness of data is, you know, almost that kind of, I guess, the bridge or the way to make sure that the conversation is ongoing and year round. I know just a practical example, or something that we found really effective at Street League when we launched our online impact dashboard. So we share publicly our impact data on our website so that people can, you know, see whether we're doing what we say we're going to do. And one of the key things for us, you know, absolutely had that fear, our trustees had that fear when we went live with the dashboard, but having a feedback mechanism underneath the dashboard so that people could actually just give us feedback and flag any concerns. So we, in our first week, you know, I often share this, we accidentally, if you filtered based on all of the different categories, you could get the data set down to 3 individuals, which is something we really hadn't wanted to do. We wanted that cohort of at least, you know, 5 or above. But somebody got in touch with us and we were able to fix it. So I think, you know, it is that, taking it back to the conversation about trust, you know, it's just maybe all of us sharing a little bit more. And I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't note that there was a great session yesterday on data science in general by Giselle and Dulcie at DataKind, but they're also leading with the Data Collective. And I wonder if that's, you know, another opportunity that practitioners in particular have to have that conversation and share good ideas and points. I think we've got one reflection from Christopher, who's, I think, recognized and echoed very much what you said, Hannah, that there is so much more than numbers to data analysis. And I know there was a great example given earlier in the keynote around, you know, actually a little sketch in the corner of a page being able to communicate the story and being much more effective and probably creating more buy-in when it's not a screen of, you know, dashboard and, you know, trying to do all things for all people. One thing I was really interested to, I guess, explore in thinking about your roles in kind of civil society and you know, government and other kind of adjacent fields is, how do we think we're doing as a sector at bridging the gap between the kind of macro big picture data questions and then the more, I suppose, practical micro data questions that might be at an individual or a service design or an organizational level. Do we think that the learning on both of those fronts is transferable? Are there learnings that we should be taking from one side to the other? It feels sometimes that we have conversations at either side and we don't necessarily always connect the two. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that.
Okay. I'm waiting just in case, Hannah, do you want to go first? Or that's a really interesting question, because I think, when you get into it, we have a massive backlog of work to be done. And I think any data team does, any data and analytics team does. And so you prioritize the things, it feels like often we prioritize the things that are going to bring value to the organization that we work for right now. And yet Nest has this social purpose. We talk so much about our social purpose. When we do any data analysis on that social purpose, it's usually for DWP or the pensions regulator. And I think I'm feeling what you've just said, Lindsey, is that I think in my own team, I feel that disconnect, and that almost is an action for me to take, or a way to think. It's like, no, if we're going to have a social purpose, how do we use the data that we have now to share more? And create a stronger link between those things. Because I think there's something about how you also motivate data and analytics teams. And it's not always about driving the hard, creating value, how we're being efficient, whatever, but also that social purpose kind of stuff, that data analysis is really motivating and interesting for people to feel like they're making a difference to all of society. So I agree, it's a thing. I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point in terms of the reasoning for doing the data analysis, and kind of trying to check ourselves as organizations, as big organizations like the GLA, like why do we do certain things? And it is often a request from someone up on high, but actually how do we actually do those things which are going to benefit the organizations who perhaps are, for example, we've got the London Data Store where we're trying to get civil society to engage and use it more, but actually maybe one of the reasons they're not is because we're thinking of it from like a perspective of what we might need or what we want to see, but actually what do organizations need and want to see, and what is relevant to the kind of service level, delivery level activities that they are doing. So I think I agree, Lindsey, that middle bit is the tricky bit. And how do we unpick that?
I mean, and I say this, well, Nest has we kind of don't know how to brand it. We have a think tank unit called Nest Insight that genuinely takes some Nest data, anonymizes it, takes external data, works with academics to kind of do some of that thinking. But it's still, Lindsey, with what you said, it's like it's still doing the big thinking over here, and we're still missing that middle thing. It's such a great observation. And I wonder how we prioritize it, because the gap is time. We all only have so much time, and we have so much data. And how do we make that easier? How do we make it more of a priority?
I wonder if that actually speaks to or ties in nicely with a question that Giselle has posed in terms of a lot of data transformation challenges are really organization-wide, but a lot of us who use data in our organizations see it as a discrete function. And, speaking from Street League experience, we have just actually in the past 6 months integrated our data and insight team into our finance team to start to create that hub or that real sense that data is actually everywhere. We're all data collectors, we're all data insight analysts, we're all continuously, engaging with data, whether we know it or not. And I suppose, the question is maybe, do we have all the people that we need in the conversation? Because I wonder if that's part of the answer to that earlier question. Are we missing some of the levels or the layers of, I suppose, organizational structures and also sector structure to have enough, or to break down the silos and to make sure that sharing is happening consistently and it's not just jumping about from micro to macro, as it were. But how do we, and particularly people who are in the session right now, who I think quite a lot are from practitioner backgrounds, how do we create that buy-in with senior leadership, for example? How do we make sure that the next Data4Good Fest is 40% maybe trustees, chief execs, and senior management teams, as well as those who absolutely protect and set up and drive our data strategies and systems. Any thoughts on how we shift the audience, I suppose, or shift the participants in this conversation around data? I guess just to share one quick example, at Street League, we don't talk about data. And that's our approach. And I've been reflecting, my reflection from today is that necessarily the right thing? Because actually there's lots of data strategy happening, but nobody necessarily knows. It's like covert ops, data strategy, which might not be a good thing now that I've shared that out loud. Delighted this is being recorded. I'm going to hand over to somebody.
I'm really thinking about what you're saying, Lindsey, because it's I've got an initiative kicking off on Monday that I don't know is going to be successful. So fingers crossed it will be. And it's a data visualization competition. So this year's Nest has been investing for 10 years. So we call it 10 years of Nest. I've gone all the way up to Exco and our CEO, all the way down to everyone. We're launching a competition to get people involved with our data. I genuinely don't know how it's going to go, but what I want to do is to stimulate a conversation where people are saying, ooh, not just here's what I think that Nest has done in 10 years. I would love people to actually show it and take it to, it might just be a picture, maybe you just do a graph, or maybe you sketch a little diagram on a serviette or something, but use data to tell a story. Because I would like to shift the conversation. It is about data literacy. It is about people using our data, but it's trying to create a conversation in the whole organization, which is really hard.
Yeah, I think just reflecting on that idea of kind of embedding the data conversation across other work as well. Like just from my experience in my previous role as the data officer, it was very much like I was leading our programs, which were civil society data programs, and then we had a lot of other community engagement activity happening, but we always found it quite difficult to quite siloed. And I'm not sure that whether that was how our team was set up, how the program was introduced, etc. But actually, in the last year, in the programs that we're offering now, data is very much embedded within them, within our grant programs, for example, with the learning add-ons. Data is a part of the syllabus, for example. We're really keen to be proactive in sharing the community insights which come out of the grant programs, which aren't necessarily data or digital grant programs. We're funding kind of other things, but actually embedding that in sort of our mainstream programs has now made data a really relevant topic that our team talk about a lot now. And community insights is such a fundamental part of the conversations we're having as a team now. But 2 years ago they weren't, even though I was working on it. So it's just interesting. I think even just shifting where that sits, where that portfolio of work sits, it no longer sits with one person. It sits sort of across the team as a principle of how we design our kind of grant programs, I think is really key. But yeah, I think you said, who do we need to have in that conversation? And I think it is, like you said, it's cross organization, cross team. You need everybody to engage in it for it to be successful.
Yeah, and actually, as you were both talking, I was trying to think about almost parallel examples in organizations where we've seen that shift, because there's often lessons to be learned from other people struggling away. And I wonder if there's something within HR and the way that HR has moved to a business partnering approach and function in a lot of organizations, and if there's something there. I will leave that as my final thought, because I want to come back to each of you. And I think it's always good in these types of events for us to take away something actionable, and if we say it out loud in front of 100, 200 plus people, then we're accountable for them. So what would you say from your last couple of days at the Data4Good Fest you are going to take away as either an action or a continued space for exploration? So it might be an ongoing learning piece as well, but just interested as to what you're really tangibly taking away from the last couple of days. Hannah, did you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. I think just the kind of points we were making earlier around creating those relationships and trust, and not being extractive when we're thinking about data, when we're thinking about insights. Being in community engagement team, we are about centering voice, and it's not about it's not about talking on behalf of people, or even using those insights to talk on behalf of people. It's supporting people, facilitating people to actually like use their own insights and use their own voice. And I think we say that a lot, and we're really keen to like action it now. And it's like actually just always taking it back to the point, like, where are these insights? Where is this data coming from? It's coming from a person, a community, etc. So how do we ensure that that's always reflected in the stories we're telling or the programs that we're designing? But yeah, and I think that's kind of a space that we're trying to hold, but we need to continue to check that we're kind of doing that.
Lindsey, I've taken two things away from the things that you have said today that have really struck me and really made me think. The first is the, why do we separate these two kind of conversations, and how can we bring them together more? Because I think that is a really important insight that you've had. The second, which I think was just a brilliant moment of you said the feedback mechanism underneath your public dashboard. I thought, I feel like I want to do that tomorrow. That really great thing, and just to be able to give a place for people to say, "Ooh, actually, have you thought about this?" Or I see that this is right. Just to give us confidence to kind of get something out there that isn't perfect.
Oh, brilliant. No, that sounds fantastic. And I must say for myself, I'm probably quite similar to you, Hannah, in terms of, I think one of the things I've reflected on the last couple of days, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow's session in the morning, I think it is around equality, diversity and inclusion data, and embedding that, in a really meaningful way. Recognizing that some of these cultural changes that we need to take as organizations, as a sector, embedding those takes time and kind of ongoing hard work. And sometimes, as you said, Hannah, you kind of commit to it, but possibly, organizational laziness, maybe we don't build in the mechanisms to keep that safeguard and keep it continuous. So that's my takeaway, is I'm going to go back to the team and make sure that we've got the safety checks in place, so that there's no organizational laziness that can sneak in with our ED&I commitments that we've recently made. So I think, looking at the time, I ran terribly over when I did my session earlier. So I'm trying desperately to regain my reputation as somebody who can tell the time. I think we will close at this point. We have had a few final last-minute chats coming through. So I think actually, though, those are continue to kind of come in. I like that. Richard Collins, I heard a talk from the head of quality at The Guardian where they had the motto, "Not wrong long," i.e. it's okay to take risks if you have mechanisms in place to fix the problems quickly. And I think that speaks really nicely to what you said, Christina, in terms of you're starting something on Monday and you don't know if it's going to be a success. But I think, as long as we've got a way to learn from all of the failings and all of the failures, then I think it will undoubtedly be a success. So I will close at that point. Thank you both so much for joining. Thank you to all of the event attendees for joining today, taking part in this conversation, but all of the sessions previously. Christina is speaking tomorrow, and when I saw what she was talking about, I thought that is definitely a session that most of us will want to pencil in, which is top 5 tips for using data when you don't have a big budget. So I think a really key session for a lot of organizations to attend. That's at 2:25 tomorrow. So please do make sure you join that, and have a lovely evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lindsey. Thanks, Hannah.
Bye, Hannah.